It's not very often you get to take a brand new showroom spec four-wheel drive and take it on some serious four-wheel drive tracks just like this. But that's what we're doing. We've got the brand new Jeep Gladiator Rubicon. That's the off-road spec model, and we're putting it through its paces on some awesome tracks out here in the bush. We camped out here last night. We've only got a short amount of time with this car, but we want to run through everything. So in terms of off-road, we're going to cover that. We're also going to look at the interior, all the tech, all the cool little features that this Gladiator has, but also do some load testing because this is a four-wheel drive ute at the end of the day and it's got a decent payload. So we want to see how it goes. So for the full review, we're going to go back to the start. We're travelling north of Sydney and we've got some four-wheel drive tracks on the radar. And on the way, we'll be able to find out what this Gladiator is like on the road, on the highway, and loaded up with gear. And of course, we'll see just how good this Gladiator is off-road. And we'll have a night around the campfire while we're at it. We've got Rubicon specification here, and you'll know Rubicon from the Wrangler, and this has all of that awesome off-road hardware we already know about. But this Gladiator brings much more wheelbase, a bigger payload, more towing capacity, and a big tub on the back. So with all those ingredients, this might be the new king of the hill of four-wheel drive utes. Our test Gladiator was fitted with a steel front bumper that cost $1,625. It improves your clearance off-road and your protection, and I reckon it looks a lot better than the factory fitting. Although the new Gladiator has a 2.7 tonne tow rating, our test vehicle does not have a tow bar fitted. So that's a test that we'll have to wait for another day. One thing to get your head around with this Gladiator is how big it is. It's much bigger than your average four-wheel drive ute. Now we could sit here and talk about mils and inches and centimetres until the cows come home, but I prefer to use a different metric. I want to know how long in SAMs is this Gladiator? 1, 2, 3. Looks like about 2 3/4 SAMs, roughly. It's been a long time between drinks for Australians who wanted a Jeep with a tub on the back, so let's have a look. Strut assisted tailgate, that's very nice. Now this spray-in tub liner is optional. It's good quality, and I reckon it would be just about essential for anyone who wanted to use this for hauling stuff around. This folding tonneau cover is also optional. Fold it back, and you've got a tub that's 1532mm long and 1442mm wide. That's a good size. Open up that tailgate, keep it down, and there's over 2 meters long of load space there. Now Jeep has given you the hint with a tread pattern on the back there. You could fit a couple of motorbikes in the back here. In terms of practicalities, this Gladiator has 4 tie-down points, 1 in each corner. I quite like these ones up the front here. They spin around, they feel quite sturdy. You've also got these adjustable load rails here. You've got 2 tie-downs additionally on each side, and that's handy if you've got something taller loaded into this Gladiator's tub. But probably my favorite feature about the Gladiator's tub, and probably the handiest as well, is the 2 lights. There's 1 on each side, they're quite bright, and it's very handy if it's nighttime like now, you can actually see what you're doing. The interior of this Gladiator is very reminiscent of a Wrangler. That's no surprise, obviously, and I don't think it's a bad thing either. This feels utilitarian, but in a premium kind of way. You've got an 8.4-inch infotainment unit here. That's got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Maps, just about everything you'd want. It's easy to use. And the reversing camera and the front trail cam on this Gladiator are actually crystal clear. Very handy for navigating what is a pretty big rig around some tight areas. You'll notice that the window controls are down here, and that's for good reason, because these doors, the roof and the windscreen actually all come off if you want to. We will get to that later, however. Behind the gear sticks, a real transfer case lever, always nice to see in a four-wheel drive. You've got 2 cup holders, decent sized center console, and some comfy seats. These leather seats are optional. Heated, and it's got a heated steering wheel as well, but standard, a Gladiator has cloth seats. Flip up this panel here and you've got a USB plug. There's also one in this center console, by the way. That's pretty handy for powering up devices, but if you're up with the times, there is USB-C there as well. But if you're not up with the times, maybe you want to plug in your Walkman or something like that, there is an auxiliary plug as well. Now, just below that, you've got 4 auxiliary switches. Now, they're not wired up to anything at the moment because they're there for when you fit accessories to this Gladiator down the track. Things like radios, driving lights, camp lights, fridges, whatever you want. They're there and they're all ready to go. And it's factory fitted, nice and quality. I think that's a really nice touch. That extra long wheelbase of the Gladiator does afford a bit more space in this second row. As you can see here, I've got plenty of leg room. There's plenty of toe and foot room as well. Headroom is good, although if you are a bit taller, you might have a propensity for hitting your head leaning forward on this roll bar. You're never going to forget that you are in a Jeep Wrangler ute. You've got two cup holders down here in the footwell, and I love these rubber mats. They've got big deep lips on them, so if they get full of mud, full of sand, full of water, whatever it is, they're going to be easy to clean after a day in the bush. You've got two more cup holders here in this pop down armrest if you've only got two people in the back here. But I reckon some of the best things about the second row of this Gladiator is when there's no one in the back. Let me explain. Behind these seats in the Gladiator, you'll find a little bit of storage, but most importantly, you've got this awesome Bluetooth speaker. Now, along with playing music at the campfire, for example, this can also charge your phone at the same time. That's a pretty cool feature. However, these seats also flip up, stadium style, and that gives you access to this lockable space here. So open those up. It's a really useful spot for recovery gear, bits and bobs, whatever you want in there. But these are also lockable. So if you've got all the doors off, you've got the roof off, but you want to store your phone in your wallet somewhere, maybe you're going for a swim or something like that, this will work wonderfully. With only 620 kilos of payload available, the Gladiator positions itself as a bit more of a lifestyle and recreational four-wheel drive ute when you compare it to the broader segment. And that's exactly what we're doing with it on our test here. Driver and passenger, along with a tub of camping and four-wheel driving gear. There's enough within the GVM figure for that sort of thing, but not really for loading it up with heavy gear and trailers in the meantime, if you did want something for work and play. There is not enough scope for 5 adults on board and a tub load of gear, for example, and even a family of 4 might be pushing it in some situations. And of course, don't forget, any accessories that you want to bolt onto this Gladiator needs to be deducted from that payload figure. One of the cool things about the Gladiator is you can remove all 4 doors and the roof and put down the windscreen. That's something that you can't do with any other four-wheel drive ute in Australia. Now, there's a couple of caveats there, obviously. Check your road rules in your local area, because it's probably illegal to drive with it on the road like that. But off-road, that's a different story. Jeep gives you a handy little toolkit with some instructions to show you how to do it. I have to say though, when you start taking these doors off, it is a bit nerve-wracking with all this nice paint there. You just don't want to damage it, so take your time. But that's the first step. 2 bolts here with Torx fittings, and then you move on the inside to undo some wiring. With that wiring out of the way, there's 1 more bolt to undo, and then that door should hopefully come off. Of course, you don't want to lose these bolts, and Jeep has thought of that. There's a handy little box under those back seats, and in there is a slot for every single one of the bolts if you take all of them off, and your doors and all the rest, so you can put them all back on when you're done. It's a pretty cool experience in a brand new car and something very unique to Jeep. It took about 5 minutes to take that 1 door off, taking our time, not trying to damage anything, so 4 times 5 is 20 minutes. And these roof panels also come off quite easily. So latch on the front here, one at the front, one at the back, and there you go. 1 panel off, 2 more, and then this is a pretty open air experience. In Australia, you can have the Gladiator with any engine you want, just as long as it's a 3.6 litre petrol V6. That makes 209 kilowatts at 6,400 RPM and 347 Newton meters at 4,100 RPM. Under the bonnet, the air intake is still a little susceptible to water ingress, but props to Jeep for keeping that alternator nice and high. Using 91 RON unleaded fuel, that engine runs through an 8-speed automatic gearbox with part-time four-wheel drive system and a low-range transfer case. Driving this Gladiator is naturally quite similar to driving a Wrangler, especially in Rubicon format. Got a small windscreen here, it's a flat windscreen, visibility isn't amazing, but overall it's actually a much better experience than a Wrangler, and that comes mostly from the wheelbase, I think. This is a much longer car overall, so although it's an old school four-wheel drive with live axles, coil springs, off-road tyres, soft suspension and all that sort of thing, this doesn't wander around as much as a Wrangler, and that is a big benefit. The ride is also a bit smoother because of the wheelbase. Compared to a Wrangler, once again, this has Fox branded shocks. They call them a 2-inch shock. They're not like a 2-inch piston or anything like that, but they're still a big, good quality shock absorber, especially compared to other four-wheel drive utes. It's certainly a lot better. and it helps the ride a little bit. This isn't as buttery smooth as a Ranger Raptor, however. It doesn't have things like internal bypassing, so it's not as much of a high-end shock, but it's still much better than most other four-wheel drive utes. Highway performance of the Gladiator is quite good and better than the Wrangler. It doesn't wander around on the road as much, and although there are heavy mud terrain tyres fitted to this Gladiator Rubicon, it's actually surprisingly quiet. One thing you can't do with a Wrangler, and you can do with this, is load up the tub. This Gladiator Rubicon has a 620 kilogram payload, and that's the highest in the range. Some only have in the 500s. So it is a bit low when compared to most other four-wheel drive utes that might have 900 kilos or something like that. For reference's sake, a Ford Ranger Raptor has 750 kilos, so 130 extra is a fair bit. So we loaded it up. We had some fencing gear in the back and some cement bags. That was about half a ton in the back, and we also had a passenger in here, so we would have been quite close to that 620 kilo payload. The good news is it can handle that quite well. Bump stop spacing reduced a little bit. It did sit down a little bit in the rear. You'll notice that the coil springs are progressive rate, but it didn't drop right down and lose all of its composure. Steering still felt pretty good, and the ride was fine for most things. You felt the weight, absolutely, but it wasn't too bad. The engine handled it pretty well also. The 8-speed ZF gearbox just let the engine rev out a little bit more. You have to remember that this 3.6 litre V6 petrol develops torque in a completely different way to other turbo diesel four-wheel drives. There's 340 odd Newton meters coming from this engine, which is down on most other four-wheel drive utes, but it comes on at a much higher RPM. It's around 4,100 revs, which is very high. Most other utes develop peak torque around 1,500, 2,000 RPM, depending on what you're looking at. So the car does need to rev a little bit more when working hard. But of course, a petrol V6 has more power than most other turbo diesel engines. This has over 200 kilowatts there, and it's got revs. It'll go over 6,000 RPM quite happily. So there's a bit more flexibility, there's more smoothness with this engine. The driveline does work for the premise of this Gladiator. It's not a four-wheel drive ute that the concreter buys to haul around gear and then bash up to Cape York. The Cape York bit, this will do, no worries, but it just won't do the hard weekly grind as well as other four-wheel drive utes out there. It definitely plays more to the lifestyle side of things, more recreation than hard work. But that's all right. Not everyone wants their four-wheel drive ute to be a load-lugging hauler. You can buy a 79 series for that. It's much less refined. It's got a lot less tech in it, and it's much harder to drive overall than this Gladiator. And a 79 would not keep up with this off-road, not within a bull's roar. If you opt for Rubicon specification like we've got here, there's a 4:1 transfer case and 4.1 diff gears, which means you've got a supremely low 77:1 crawl ratio. And just like the Wrangler Rubicon, you also get locking front and rear differentials and a disconnecting sway bar. TV screens do have a little habit of making tough four-wheel driving look a little bit more tame than it actually is. So just to show you what we're going to attempt in this Gladiator now, borrowed Lucas's, the cameraman's phone, and I've got his level. So this climb here, it's sandstone, but it's got some really sort of slippery sand on top of it as well, and we've had a little bit of rain here recently, so there's not a stack of grip. Let's just have a look there. So this climb, that's 33 degrees there, but this extra step up here, 50 degrees, even sharper, that's sort of nearing vertical, and if we don't pick our lines correctly, we'll have to be climbing up this, watching our belly clearance and all sorts of things, so it'll be a fair challenge for this car. I've got a few different ways to take it, but I've gone all out with what this Gladiator has. So front and rear locking differentials are engaged. I've disconnected the front sway bar, and there's an off-road plus button there. Now the Wrangler doesn't have that. What that does when you're in low range, like I'm in now, it softens off the throttle response and it tightens up traction control. So when you're rock crawling, you can get better throttle control pretty much when you're crawling nice and slow. So all of that is engaged. Let's see how we go. Also worth noting tyre pressures. So we were originally at around 16 pounds, but still felt a bit slippery underfoot with this Gladiator because these BFG tyres, KM2s, They're actually a light truck tyre, so that means that they're much stiffer through the sidewall, much heavier duty overall. So when you take air out of the tyres, they don't bag out as much as a passenger construction tyre. So we went low, we're at 10 pounds all round now. Let's see if we can get up this bad boy. Oh, the steering is very heavy with the tyre pressures down, I have to say, but it's kind of part of the fun too. It makes it feel like a old school four-wheel drive. With a long wheelbase and 13.6 metre turning circle, this Gladiator is nowhere near as nimble as a Wrangler Unlimited, let alone a two-door Limited. That length does give a great feeling of stability on steep climbs, however, and with plenty of articulation on offer, it didn't feel phased on these challenges. Alright, climb that bit there. Alright, but this thing's crawling pretty well. We've got to be tricky with our line because we are bellying out a little bit. This is a long vehicle after all. However, we might be right here to pop it up. Along with the rock sliders, the Gladiator gets some nice protection at the back. Little bars that sit in each corner and protect the rear end from bottoming out, and it saved our bacon on this climb. Oh no, I'm backed off. There we go.
Nice drive.
It is nice to have a revvy petrol engine like this, because when you've got 77:1 crawl ratio like this Gladiator has, you can really do that slow crawl. But the benefit of this engine is you can rev it out and get a bit more wheel speed so you can get those tyres working. With clearances out of the way and a bit of tyre grip, it's a pretty decent little climb that this car did. You probably wouldn't want to try that with many stock vehicles. Some other new technology that the Gladiator scores is a crisp front-facing camera called Trail Cam, and that greatly helps with wheel placement off-road. And if it gets muddy, it can even give itself a little bath. There's also select speed on this Gladiator, and that's a kind of off-road cruise control and hill descent control rolled into one. And don't forget about off-road pages through the infotainment display. That gives you access to plenty of additional off-road information while you're out on the tracks. We were on a beautiful track that descended into a dense patch of viney rainforest, reminding me of some kind of tropical jungle or the Malaysian Rainforest Challenge. The track was muddy and rutted with some tight corners and side angles to contend with. Getting slowly tighter and trickier, we met our first big obstacle on the track, and it's a real doozy. There's a huge tree that fell down right across the track, and although it's been chopped down a bit, it's still there and you need to get up and over it to keep going. It's very muddy and slippery, and you can see where many previous attempts have used whatever rocks and branches and stumps they have available to try and build the track up to get up and over. This test is all about traction and clearance. Most other stock standard four-wheel drives wouldn't even be able to get a look in, and modified vehicles mostly need to winch across. And you can see there's a U-turn bay there where lots of people have just turned around. But the big question is, what about this big wheelbase on the Gladiator? Will it help or will it hinder the Gladiator in getting across? There's only one way to find out, and with max tracks down and a few rocks moved, we made a slow and steady approach. We've only got one shot at getting this right, and we're running the risk of getting proper stuck.
Well, unfortunately, when you're off-road, not everything always goes to plan, and that's what happened here today. This Gladiator did get defeated by this track. Maybe if someone else was driving, it might have done it. Maybe if I just nailed it across with a bit less regard for the car, it might have done it. But the ramp over was the big issue here. The tyres got hung up. The fact that we even tried to attempt this track in a stock standard Gladiator Rubicon is testament to how good it is. Although it didn't do it, the fact that it could even get halfway across, most other four-wheel drive utes could barely get their nose up to the front here before they'd rip a front bumper off. If it was something with a shorter wheelbase, Wrangler Rubicon perhaps, something that still has good tyres, lots of clearance, but just a bit better ramp over, probably would have gotten over a little bit easier. But testament to this Gladiator. It's scraped and it banged, but it's not damaged and it's ready to keep going. In terms of ownership, the Gladiator is covered by a 5-year and 100,000 kilometre warranty, and that comes with 5 years of roadside assistance and 5 years of capped price servicing. Service intervals come at 12 months or 12,000 kilometres, and you're looking at $399 per visit, so over 5 years, that's $1,995. This was an awesome test, and I have to say I had a lot of fun with this Jeep Gladiator. I only hope that you guys enjoyed the content as well. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you do like the content, hit like, consider subscribing to CarAdvice.com, and check out our review on the website for the full story. It's great that we finally get this Gladiator in Australia, and it's a very special vehicle. There's a few things we don't like about this Gladiator, I have to say. The lack of a diesel option is a real no-no, especially in this four-wheel drive ute segment, and for me and a few other buyers, the Payload is on the small side. However, this Jeep Gladiator does give another option in that high-end four-wheel drive ute segment. Like other Jeeps, it's immensely capable off-road. This can rock crawl and jump over a lot of things that others just won't be able to look at. And it's got some serious hardware that others don't have as well. And on-road, this Gladiator is surprisingly very nice. That long wheelbase smooths the ride out, doesn't wander around the road as much as the Wrangler, and all in all, with all of that tech and special stuff inside, combined with the really serious off-road mechanicals, this is a unique four-wheel drive ute and really plays strongly in the lifestyle segment. No, it's not going to take on the 79 series Land Cruiser as a workhorse. You probably won't see too many of these at work sites around Australia, but you'll see plenty in the bush, you'll see plenty out the beach, because it's still a very special vehicle.